Hello there, my fellow myth and fantasy nerds. My name is Tanner, and I'd like to welcome you back to my YouTube channel. Alright, let's get this out of the way. No, I am not in my usual studio. I'm currently visiting my dad and stepmom at the time of filming this, but by the time this is released, I will more than likely be back in my studio. Now that we're up to speed, this week's video will be part 2 in my series documenting fairy and fae lore. In my last video of this series, link up in the cards and in the description down below, I did my best to answer the question, what exactly is a fairy? As well as talking about the fae courts and the differences between trooping, solitary, and domesticated fairies. Whereas in this video, I will be documenting some of the different Fae lineages throughout folklore. Some of these lineages you might already know about, others may be new to you, and still others you may have known about, but you might not know that they were actually members of the Fae folk. Now before I move on, as with my last video, this video is dedicated to my wonderful niece, River. Uncle Tanner loves you. So as always, please make sure to leave a like on this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe down below. Pretty please! It'll help me make more content for you. And without further ado, here is Fairy Lore Part 2, Fae Lineages. So to start things off, the first lineage we'll be talking about is Changelings. Now, if you've ever played one of these as a character in Dungeons and Dragons, you probably think of these creatures as shapeshifters, who can mimic any person they choose. However, in ancient lore, this wasn't always the case. Changelings in the original stories were the Fae replacements for people, usually children, who were spirited away by the fair folk. The changeling would then mimic the appearance of the one spirited away, although this mimicry would almost always have some minor flaws. Now, some of these flaws, such as a higher intellect than is normal for a child of the same age, could be hidden. However, things such as facial hair, abnormally large beady eyes, and long teeth may make you a bit suspicious. Now, the reasons why a child would be spirited away and replaced are just as varied as the Fae themselves. Some may be spirited away because they were considered adorable or beautiful by the Fae. Some were taken away to become servants, and some were even taken away as punishment for the parents offending the fair folk in some way or another. If one discovered their child was swapped with a changeling, there were many different things one could do to have their child returned to them. These ways include, but were not limited to, taking the changeling into the wilderness for the Fae to reclaim them, making the changeling laugh, and torturing the changeling into submission. That last one is one that I think was how many people would excuse child abuse, especially if their child was physically deformed in one way or another. Yeesh, ableist much? Now, some people were said to have been kidnapped as adults, typically to be married into the fair folk or to raise their children. In those cases, the changeling would take the form of a log, enchanted in such a way as to take on the kidnapped person's appearance. After a short time, this enchanted log would become sick and die, thereby leaving the loved ones of the kidnapped person none the wiser. Now, the most famous case of changeling related murder is the case of Bridget Cleary, who in 1895 era Ireland was killed by her husband Michael, who would then burn the body in an attempt to get his real wife back from the Fae. And I don't know about you, but that just sounds like a classic case of Capgras syndrome. Another Fae lineage that is present in folklore and has definitely stuck around in the modern day is the leprechaun. Known for their mischievous natures, leprechauns were sometimes classified as solitary fairies, like the ones we discussed in part 1 of this series. One well known fact about leprechauns is that they were said to be cobblers, shoemakers. Modern day leprechauns have pretty much remained unchanged from the original sources, with one major difference. Leprechauns were originally said to wear bright red jackets and didn't change to the popular green until around the 20th century. Before then, red clothing signified solitary fairies, whereas trooping fairies wore green. In many stories, it is said that if one were to capture a leprechaun, the leprechaun would be obligated to show you where their gold was located. However, like all other solitary fairies, leprechauns were a tricky bunch and would have ways of making sure their gold stayed hidden. According to one such story, a farmer caught a leprechaun and ordered him to lead him to the gold. The leprechaun showed him the location, but when the farmer told him to dig it, the leprechaun said, "Alas, I would, but I haven't got a spade." The leprechaun then took a stick, poked it into the ground, and threw his hat on top of it. "There, the spot has been marked. Tomorrow you can come back with a spade and dig up me gold. Now please let me go." The farmer, thoroughly convinced that the leprechaun meant no mischief, let him go and went home. However, when he got back to the location the next morning, spade in hand, the ground was scattered with identical sticks and hats, thereby making the gold next to impossible to locate. It was at this point the farmer knew he had been well and truly bamboozled. Keeping to the topic of common household fairies, next up on my list are the Brownies and the Boggarts. Now, it is said that Brownies will do various household chores while everyone else in the house is asleep, only asking for food and drink in exchange. These Fae are said to be particularly fond of milk, cream, and cake. If your house had a brownie in it, it was said to be a sign of abundance. However, like the other members of the fair folk, brownies were said to be a fickle, temperamental group and were very easy to offend. Something as minor as rearranging the furniture or moving a broom could upset them. And if they weren't pacified, the best case scenario would be they just leave in a huff. Worst case scenario, however, is the brownie becomes a boggart, which basically does the exact opposite of what brownies normally do. Instead of cleaning the house, they dirty the house and will do other things to just cause chaos and mayhem. These include, but aren't limited to, stealing and moving things around, causing your milk to sour, messing around with your pets and livestock, and even jumping into bed to pull on your ears. Moving out of the house is completely out of the question, as the Boggart is said to follow families no matter where they go. However, it is said that if you hang a horseshoe on the knob of your front door and leave a pile of salt outside the doors to various rooms, you will keep the Boggart at bay. Now, in the UK, particularly in Cornwall and Devon, pixies are said to be the most common Fae lineage. Cornish pixies from Harry Potter, anyone? Stone circles and large mounds are said to be the entrances to the underground layers of pixies, and pixies themselves are said to be friendly, gentle fae, even going so far as being described as childlike, both in size and in behavior. Pixies are said to be playful and mischievous, and tend to hang out in groups, thereby making pixies spotted alone quite unusual. They mostly spend their times singing and dancing and playing harmless pranks on hapless humans. However, they were also said to punish humans by kidnapping children, though there are even more stories of pixies being rather fond of humans, especially children, but it extends to anyone who means them no harm. This includes giving children blessings in one form or another, playing alongside them, and even granting them wishes in some stories. Now, the modern depiction of a pixie is a small humanoid with pointed ears and large wings on their backs. Back in Victorian times, pixies were described as typically wearing nothing but old rags. However, a good way to make a friend with a pixie would be to give it new clothes. Now, pixie lore changed somewhat with the rise of Christianity in Britain, and they became the souls of children who died before being baptized. They would change into pixies shortly after their funeral and would remain in this plane of existence, unable to pass on, but with the same childlike wonder they had when they were alive. Pixie lore would change again with the release of J.M. Barrie's classic, Peter Pan. In this story, pixies are native to Neverland, and according to the original text, their origin story is as follows. When the first baby laughed for the first time, its laugh broke into 1,000 pieces, and they all went skipping about. And that was the beginning of the fairies. And now, when every baby is born, its first laugh becomes a fairy. Honestly, in my opinion, that's a much more agreeable origin to pixies than the other. Don't you think? Now, before we wrap things up, there is one more fae that I would like to talk about, and that would be the Banshee. Now, the name roughly translates from Old Irish to the woman of the fairy mounds, and they were described as either young or old women, with red, bloodshot eyes from the constant weeping and wailing they're well known for. The elderly appearing Banshee are said to be short, wearing a gray cloak over a green dress, while the Banshee that appear as maidens are said to be rather tall, with hair that is either red, gold, or silver in color, with a ghostly white skin tone, and wearing a white dress. Banshee are said to be the omens of a family member's inevitable passing, and their wailing is said to be the first signal. Now, either way you hear about Banshee, they are always seen to be portents of doom. Some lore states that Banshee were the ghosts of women who died in severe, barbaric ways. If that woman was abused by her family, then her spirit would hang around angrily and wait for those who abused them to die as well. A more common explanation is that the Banshee are spirits of women who died too soon, and had a strong bond with their family, so they would stick around and watch over those families. Now, these Banshee songs would be much more soothing and yet still have that mournful tone to them. This lore would tie in with the ritual of keening, which I think might still be practiced in Ireland and Scotland to this day. I'm not quite sure about that though. Keening was a ritual meant to honor the dead and is almost like singing or wailing with hand movements that is, unlike your typical singing and dancing, completely improvised and unplanned. Sometimes a banshee would show up and wail before the death even occurred, and the person who is destined to die may hear the wailing of the banshee days, even weeks before anyone else heard it. It was even said that multiple banshee would show up at the death of someone of much greater importance than your average Joe. Now, I think it would be safe to say that despite their morbid origins and stories, the Banshee are not actively harmful or malicious. However, due to their nature as omens of death, I still think it's a good idea to avoid them at all costs. On that note, there we have it. That was part 2 of Fairy Lore, Fae Lineages. If you liked this video and you want more, please consider leaving a like and subscribing down below so you don't miss any new content from me. Also, if you have any other ideas for what you want to see in any future videos, please leave your suggestions in the comments down below. Who knows? It might just happen. Alright, well, that's all the time I have for this video, so I'll see you all next week with part 3 of this series, where I will go over the different rules that people have said would ensure your protection should you encounter a Fae creature. See you guys then.